Hello, everyone who is joining. My name is Reed Brody. On behalf of Trial International, the International Commission of Jurists, the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights, Human Rights Watch, and Reporters Without Borders, I'd like to welcome you to this briefing. Next Monday, on April 25th, the trial of Bai L, an alleged Gambian Death Squad member, will begin in Celle, Germany, near Hanover. This is the first trial, first international trial, of a member of Yahya Jammeh's regime. Indeed, it's the first trial anywhere in the world, including in the Gambia, of an alleged member of Jammeh's infamous hit squad, the Junglers. And today we will talk about the upcoming trial, but we will also discuss the wider efforts to seek accountability for the crimes of the past. In November, a Gambian Truth Commission, the TRRC, after over 2 years of widely followed public hearings, called for the prosecution of Jammeh and scores of others, including Bai L, for their alleged crimes, and called for the establishment of a new court to try them. The Gambian government is now examining whether and how to conduct those trials, and it has until May 25th to deliver a so-called white paper to present its plans. Just last week, though, as I think we'll hear from some of the speakers, the government's commitment to the TRRC was called into question when, on the nomination of President Barrow, 2 of Yahya Jammeh's closest allies were appointed as Speaker and Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, of the body which will have to approve the establishment of any new tribunal. And the new speaker famously said that the TRRC's report should be put in a wastepaper basket. And just last week, after his nomination as speaker, he called for Jammeh's return to the Gambia. So today's briefing will be in 3 parts. First, we will hear from victims about the case of Bai L itself. Bai L is accused as one of the Junglers of notably having driven his accomplices to various crime scenes. And we will hear from the children of 2 of the alleged victims, or 2 of the victims, Deyda, Hydara, and Deyda Nyasi. We will hear from their children. I should note that these are not the only cases in which Bai L was allegedly involved. He himself described in a radio interview his participation in the murder of 59 West African migrants in 2005, as well as in the execution of the former intelligence chief Daba Marineh and 4 associates in April 2006, and the killing of Jammeh's brother, Haruna Jammeh. After hearing from the 2 children, Baba Hydara and Amie Nyasi, sorry, Amie Sillah.
You're making a mistake, right?
Sorry, go ahead.
Lawyer Sillah is Amie Sillah is not Nyasi's daughter, is it?
Yes, correct. I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah, is Lawyer Sillah's daughter, Amie Sillah.
Lawyer Sillah's daughter, Amie Sillah.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, not Nyasi.
I'm sorry. Then we'll hear from our colleagues at Trial International and the ECCHR about why this trial is being held in Germany and how the principle of universal jurisdiction has led to cases against Jammeh's accomplices, not just in Germany, but in Switzerland and the US. And finally, we will hear from 2 Gambian activists about the Truth Commission report and the ongoing efforts in the Gambia to hold Jammeh and his and other officials of his regime to account. This morning, our organizations put out a question and answer about the trial. And if you go to the websites of Human Rights Watch and Trial International, you will see those questions and answers. But before we turn to our speakers, we're going to see a 5-minute video made by Human Rights Watch that will give, for those who are less familiar with the situation in Gambia and Yahya Jammeh, will give an overall idea of the crimes and of the TRRC report. Luis?
He broke my family into pieces, and then he broke so many families into pieces. My dad went missing when I was just 14 years old. He was against things that Yahya had been doing. Sometimes I find it so hard to understand these things.
Some people liked Jammeh, loved him, and didn't believe what people were telling them.
For 22 years, Yahya Jammeh was the president of Gambia. His rule was marked by the torture and killing of dissenters, the arrest of journalists, sexual violence, massive corruption. In January 2017, Jammeh fled to Equatorial Guinea. And now, details of the Jammeh government's crimes are coming out.
Good morning, everyone. I call to order the first public meeting of the TRRC.
This is an investigation into the mass atrocities that occurred in this country between 1994 and 2017.
The testimonies that came out at the Truth Commission, the TRRC, have implicated Jammeh personally in many of the worst crimes.
Yahya Jammeh told you what?
He told me clearly, we have to execute the ringleaders.
And that is what you did?
Exactly.
Everybody is glued to their TVs, their phones, on Facebook, just to hear from people who had killed people, from people who had tortured people.
Yahya Jammeh said, let's kill these people and cut their flesh into pieces.
Cut them up into pieces. Like they would do meat.
Exactly.
The Gambia was a place where a dictator was operating undercover. We have also seen a lot of non-Gambians being killed in Gambia, being imprisoned for nothing.
These people are mercenaries. The order from the head of state, the former president, Yahya Jammeh, is they are all to be executed.
One man survived to tell the story of the massacre of 59 West African migrants.
I tell my guys, I have my hand out on the road, and he says, God who wants to save you, to tell the world what Yahya Jammeh have done to us and how he have killed us.
I hope justice will be saved and the perpetrators will be brought before law.
Jammeh organized a phony AIDS program which forced HIV-positive Gambians to give up their medicines and put themselves in his personal care.
The rules was that anyone that came for the treatment, they were told you were using ARV, you would have to stop it.
Some died, no matter how much we tried. Why these people died? It's because of the length they stayed at the presidential treatment program.
Yeah, Jammeh was very powerful and cunning. He targeted young women from vulnerable families and using state institutions and resources to ensure that women could not say no.
There was a whole system for him to exploit, for him to rape.
He said, let's see if you are a virgin. And swear to God, I was scared.
My justice, most importantly, includes a whole system change so that we can prosecute this man, have our day in court. I want the next person after me to be a little less scared.
Now the Truth Commission will recommend that those behind the worst crimes be prosecuted, and it will be up to the government to seek Jammeh's extradition.
It is the last hope for many victims. Their fear every day is that it is all going to come to naught. I urge this government to implement every single recommendation that will come out of this commission.
I just have one wish. I wish I will have the opportunity to face Yahya himself and then ask him why he had to kill my dad.
The least that a victim needs is the truth. So the testimonies and the stories of these people makes people know who Jammeh really was. Justice for all of those people means Jammeh would pay for everything that he had done.
So, the first person who will speak is Baba Hydara. Baba is the son of the slain journalist Deyda Hydara. Baba is already in Celle. He is a joint plaintiff in the case against Bai L. So, Baba, it's yours.
Hello everyone. And thanks for taking the time to come and join this important event. Just like Brody just mentioned, I am in Sillah, being a plaintiff against Bai L. I want to just tell you a little bit about my dad before saying more about the case. My dad was a journalist, Deyda Hydara. He was co-publisher of the Point newspaper. He has his own newspaper. And at the same time, he was correspondent of AFP, Agence France Presse, and also a representative of RSF, Reporters Without Borders. He was a very serious guy about his work. He really would stay long at the office, really trying to put together his editorial. And that was one of the things that Jammeh really hated. And one of those columns he used to write was like, "Good morning, Mr. President." And in that column, he used to highlight most of this corruption that was going then, and also come up with things that always Jammeh would be really angry about, because it was like things that he thought nobody knew. But my dad, being a good journalist, had like really good sources. Always they will come up with things that, were really happening. So he received threats during his time, couple of threats, but always he was just playing them down, that he was just doing his job. I wouldn't say even a critic. I wanted to say a critic of the Jammeh government and the way he was handling business. But he was just doing his job as a journalist. That's why, we have the journalists, because they have to really tell us things, go and find sources and bring the news and disseminate it to the masses so that, they can know what is going on. And that's what he was doing. And I guess he was really good at it. That's why in the end, Jammeh was bringing all those threats and trying to stop him from doing this column, even from publishing the newspaper. He tried numerous times to stop the newspaper, but I don't know what kept it still, and I remember one time even he sent soldiers at the Point newspaper's offices to arrest everyone. Actually, they even wanted to take the watchman. He was only a watchman, but they even wanted to take him along. So that's why when he was murdered, it was shocking. But at the same time, it was something that, somehow, you would expect that he would try and do something to my dad. And finally, 16 December, he was murdered. He was murdered because of the work he was doing, because of, he said no to him. He said no to Jammeh, that I will keep on writing what I'm writing about you. And everyone involved in my dad's murder will face justice, just like Bai L is facing justice this coming days. We won't stop until each one of them is brought to a court of law, each one of them. And we know very well that is the first trial of an alleged killer, of an alleged jungler. But we know that Bai L was only a small player in the murder of my dad, was a small player. Go straight at the top where the order came from. And all of us, we know this. So that makes it very serious that Jammeh is still sitting at Equatorial Guinea and nothing is happening to him. So that's why we should do everything, see how to bring Jammeh to really in a court of law. And just like earlier, the video we were watching, he has to pay for those crimes he committed for 22 years. He has to. For an example, when he murdered my dad, one of the junglers was narrating how they were giving $50,000 by Tumbul Tamba. Then he was the guy who was the head of the junglers. And we all know that Tumbul Tamba couldn't bring $50,000 to give to all those junglers that were involved. So where it came from, that same jungler said that probably they must have got it from Jammeh. And we all know that it's Jammeh who gave them that money. $50,000, approximately $1,200. That's the amount that was paid to the killers of my dad. We want to see Jammeh himself brought to justice. And this is something that we should really echo everywhere, because what is happening today in the Gambia this last couple of weeks, we all know it. There were two nominations. There were nomination of Fabakary Jata, Tombong Jata. I always made a mistake saying his name. And also Sidin Jai. These two guys, they were enablers, Jammeh's enablers. And not only enablers, but when Jammeh left, they keep on defending him. They keep on defending him until to a point where Fabakary Tombong Jata was protesting against the recommendation of the TRRC. What happened is, when the TRRC was about to come up with the recommendation, they protested, the AFPRC, and Fabakary Tombong Jata was leading this protest. It started from the arch, and they took a petition to the Ministry of Justice, and gave the minister, and came back to the arch, and they had a question and answer. And they made it really clear that all this is nonsense. All the TRRC work is nonsense. And we all know that that's a big lie. They're only trying to defend Jammeh. And we should do everything in our power to show our government that justice must come. We cannot let Jammeh and also this recommendation from the TRRC just go in vain. We will do whatever it takes to make sure that Jammeh will face the music one day. It's just now that, this white paper is delaying everything. But even with or without the white paper. This trial that we're having in Germany, though by law is just a somebody that they gave an order to, but where the order came from will always be a question to answer. And one day, inshallah, we will answer it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Baba, one of my personal heroes, Baba Hydara. We're going to hear from Amie Sillah. One of the crimes, the alleged crimes for which Bai L is accused is the attempted murder of her father, who survived, but as Amie may tell us, survived survived in very bad shape. And Amie is, we're hoping to get Amie and her family in as plaintiffs, but because the father is alive, it's complicated legal situation. But we very much consider the Sillah family, and everybody considers the Sillah family to be part of this case. So Amie?
Yes, Reed. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amie Sillah, like Reed just said, and I am Ousman Sillah's daughter. On behalf of the Sillah family, we are highly grateful for this initiative, which gives us hope. A hope we have yearned for years and needed since that awful day on December 26th, 2003. Our dad is a great man who has served the Gambia as an ADC to President Jawara. He was the first Gambian to receive the Baton of Honor as a cadet. He was a High Court judge in the 90s and also the president of the Bar Association during the Jammeh-era. He was a giver who did a lot of pro bono cases for the less fortunate who couldn't afford it. And yet still he was a hands-on dad whom we loved abundantly because he was our main provider. He provided us with a good education, which was interrupted due to his shooting. To speak on this, as I said, brings hope for us, but at the same time, it revisits a painful past. All the privileges provided by him to his family, his friends, and the less fortunate that he was helping was all put to a halt. They aimed to scare, but at the same time, they wanted to silence him for good. They aimed to kill. We are very thankful that he survived it, even though he was affected mentally, physically, emotionally, financially, and also him battling some post-traumatic stress syndrome. We still want justice. He got airlifted to Dakar with all the medical bills, him relocating to the US without some of us, but at the same time to a country where he could not practice his craft. That affected his self-esteem a lot, especially as a provider. He is in a very late stage of dementia as we speak right now. He cannot do any basic thing for himself except eat slowly, but everything has to be done for him. And he does not even remember the names of his kids. So we had to hire carers for him to tend to his needs. But we can never thank you enough, because we hope this is just the beginning to the justice that him and the family deserve. and to all the other victims involved. We hope to know why. We hope to know how and who. So we thank you all tremendously for this. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Amie. So we have seen two cases of the alleged operations that Bai L was involved in as a driver for the junglers. We're going to turn now to why this trial is in Germany. How is it that cases are brought against Jammeh-era officials in Germany, Switzerland, the United States? And so I'm first going to turn to Babaka Tracy Mputu from Trial International, that has been very, very active on this case, and also very much on a case that she'll tell you about, I'm sure, in Switzerland. And Trial generally is one of the leading organizations fighting for the use of universal criminal jurisdiction in the world. So Babaka, it's yours.
Hi everyone, thanks for the introduction, Reid, and thank you very much, Baba and Amie, for speaking with us today. So about universal jurisdictions and actually why the trial is taking place in Germany, I'm only going to say a few words, and Arne, maybe you will be able to further my explanation, because Arne is from the ECCHR, which is based in Berlin. So the trial actually takes place in Germany thanks to this principle we call universal jurisdiction, which allows for the prosecution and the investigation of crimes, international crimes, so the most serious crimes under international law, in different countries, regardless of the nationality of the victims and of the suspects. And what happened is that Germany in 2002, they integrated the principle of universal jurisdiction in their law, and they included rules that allowed them to prosecute and investigate crimes committed abroad, the most serious crimes, such as those of which Bai L is currently accused. And the trial is going to take place in Celle because Bai L was living in Hanover, and this is the closest court to where he's living, and so it's actually the domicile of the defendant that matters in such cases. And he was on the German territory, and this is why the jurisdiction of Germany could apply. And I will let Arne further this explanation. And regarding Trial International's work, so it's an NGO that was created 20 years ago in Geneva, but we also have offices in Bosnia-Herzegovina as well as in the DRC, where we work on the crimes committed in the Great Lake region. And our mandate is all about our commitment to fight against the impunity of international crimes, such as those which are at stake with the opening of Bai L's trial next week. And it's all about supporting the victims and the survivors to this crime in their quest of justice. And this is why we have developed expertise in universal jurisdiction cases, and we have worked a lot on the crimes committed in the Gambia under Jammeh. So I'm just going to give you two other examples of cases that are being prosecuted and investigated under universal jurisdiction, precisely about the serious crimes that have been committed under Jammeh. So the first one is ongoing in Switzerland. So in Switzerland, universal jurisdiction only requires the presence of the suspect on Swiss territory and the absence of his extradition. And so in January 2017, Trial International filed a complaint for torture against former Minister of Interior Ousman when we were alerted of his presence in Switzerland. So Sonko, as you know, was not only Minister of Interior, but also Inspector General of the police. And as such, he was in charge of managing prisons and detention centers where torture has been practiced, including in the infamous Mile 2 prison. His arrest was ordered following Trial International's complaint, and the charges were requalified from torture to crimes against humanity, which is one of the another international crimes, which puts the crimes he's alleged to have committed more in the context of generalized and systematic attacks against civilians, including those opposed to Jammeh's regime. And so since then, Sonko has been in detention, and this detention has been renewed several times. The investigation is still ongoing. 9 victims have filed additional complaints against Sonko, 4 of them for acts of torture, including sexual violence, that were committed following the failed attempted coup of 2006. And there are also 4 other victims who filed complaints for acts of torture that were committed in 2016, following arrests that happened in connection with peaceful demonstrations from the opposition as part of the presidential election in 2016. And one of the victims, who was the head of the United Democratic Party, Sulu Sandeng, who organized the peaceful demonstration, died in detention following the torture he suffered. So the investigations are ongoing in Switzerland. The Office of the Attorney General traveled in the Gambia, including last year, to further their investigations and mutual legal assistance requests that allow actually cooperation between several countries to make sure that witnesses and victims can be heard, even though they are not in the country where prosecution is taking place. So such requests have allowed the hearing of several witnesses. And as of today, over 20 witnesses have been heard. So we are hoping for an indictment very soon. And this would be a big step for the recognition of the massive human rights violations committed under Jammeh, because Sonko was one of the strongmen of this regime. So this was the example of Switzerland. In the US, you have another alleged former jungler, Michael Correa, who is subject to a procedure, which was opened in the United States. He's accused of torturing detainees following the failed attempted coup of 2006. After news of his detention in the US for overstaying his visa, with Korea's victim, as well as a coalition of several human rights organizations, Trial International called for the US to investigate on the serious human rights violations he could have committed in the Gambia. And we are now working with several NGOs, including the Center for Justice and Accountability, to produce evidence and support the victims in this case. And so in June 2020, Korea was indicted on the basis of the US extraterritorial statute. This actually allows the US prosecution authorities to prosecute cases of torture that happen outside of the US if the suspect is in the US. And so there was an indictment against Korea for 6 counts of torture and 1 count of conspiracy to commit torture. And so Korea was actually the first alleged former jungler to be indicted for the commission of human rights violations in the Gambia before Bai L, who was indicted in March 2022. And a trial is expected for early 2023, and it would be the 2nd case to be tried in the US under this extraterritorial torture statute. This is also an extremely important case because holding former junglers accountable for their role in the massive human rights violations that have been committed in the Gambia, during the Jammeh-era is a huge step to lead to the accountability of the most responsible, namely Jammeh himself, because he created the junglers, this special force, specifically in view of eliminating all form of actual or perceived threat to his power. So the fact that we have 1 trial opening next week in Germany and potentially another one in the US next year against 2 junglers is a huge step in the fight against the impunity of the crimes committed in the Gambia. I'm giving the floor to Amie, if that's okay for everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Babaka, and hello, everyone. My name is Arne Badelle, and I work as a legal advisor for the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights based in Berlin. And we are supporting the accountability efforts around the upcoming trial with our experience in universal jurisdiction proceedings in Germany. And accordingly, I would like to take this opportunity to contextualize this trial within German universal jurisdiction practice. Because I think it can be said that the trial against Bai L is not only an important step towards accountability for the crimes of the Jammeh regime, it also shows why universal jurisdiction is important. Because since a crime against humanity is at issue, the court will have to look beyond the individual responsibility of the defendant to the systematic and widespread attack that has been committed against the Gambian society by the Jammeh regime. And the court's assessment may thus pave the way for future proceedings against Jammeh and his higher-ranking accomplices in the Gambia or elsewhere. I think the trial also shows that universal jurisdiction is gaining momentum in Germany in recent times. As Babacar already mentioned, this year marks the 20th anniversary of the German Code of Crimes Against International Law, which largely reflects the provisions of the Rome Statute. However, initially there were little to no trials in Germany. It was more or less a law without practice. And now, almost 20 years later, we have a landmark conviction in a first trial worldwide on state torture in Syria, and also a groundbreaking first conviction for genocide against the Yazidi population in Iraq. However, despite the progress that has been made and is being made, we as ECCHR still see a lot of room for improvement in terms of survivor participation and access to the trials for members of the affected society, as well as trial documentation. Because one should never forget that the principle of universal jurisdiction implies that German courts are holding trial on behalf of the international community. And this and therefore the international community should also have easy access to the proceedings, which certainly is not always the case. And also other issues outside the criminal justice system can prevent civil society from participating in the proceedings, such as visa regulations or lack of financial resources when it comes to necessary traveling, as we can see in this trial. I think it should be noted, however, that the court in the present proceedings has so far been very cooperative when it comes to access to translation. Upon request, it has granted access to the translation system, or it announced that it will grant access to the translation system for English-speaking journalists. And I think this is already a good sign. So in that sense, we hope that the findings of the trial will not remain confined to the courtroom, but will also benefit the Gambian society and the international community in terms of further truth-finding and transitional justice. Because accountability, of course, should not come to an end with this trial, but go beyond it, addressing the responsibility of higher-ranking perpetrators, such as Jammeh himself. And with that being said, I return the floor to you, Reid.
Thank you, Babacar and Arne. We've gotten a few messages from people in Gambia that the electricity has gone down, and several people have told us that they've been cut out. But thank you. I think this is a very important point. So we have actually 3 trials, or 3 people have been arrested around the world, and actually Bai L was the most recent, but that has kind of leapfrogged over the others. And as Arne was saying, and it's really one of the reasons we organized these webinar and everything, is because it's very difficult to convey to internationally what's going on in this courtroom, to which very few people will have access. I mean, Baba Hydara just rubbing his eyes because he went on a 15-hour flight. He had to go to Dakar to get a visa. It's not easy. We're trying to get the Sillah family as participants. It's a real challenge to make this trial accessible to the most concerned to the people of the Gambia. So now we're going to turn to the third aspect of this, accountability, the wider accountability efforts. I should, as an introduction, say that the TRRC did deliver its report in November. The government published the entire report online. If you go to the Ministry of Justice website, the entire TRRC report is there. The TRRC found that crimes against humanity had been committed in the Gambia and that Jammeh and 69 other henchmen were responsible for 44 specific crimes. One point, they did say that for those alleged perpetrators whose acts did not amount to crimes against humanity, that they could apply for amnesty if they told the whole truth and expressed, quote, genuine remorse. And the accountability, the amnesty process has not been very transparent, to say the least. It's been reported that Sana Sabali, the '2 man in Jammeh's junta, who we saw on that video in the beginning, saying that he killed all the ringleaders of a 1994 attempted coup, has been recommended for amnesty, something that, of course, victims groups have vehemently denounced. And in its report, the TRRC also briefly considered how prosecutions should take place. It said that a purely domestic tribunal would not work because of deficiencies in Gambia's legal system and infrastructure, and it recommended an internationalized tribunal. And the government under Gambian law is now obliged to issue a so-called white paper by May 25th, containing its response to the TRRC's recommendations. So with that background, first we're going to hear from Fatoumata Sandeng. You saw her on the video. It was her, and Babaka mentioned the case of her father, Solo Sandeng, whose murder actually was one of the last straws that triggered the outrage that led to the downfall of Jammeh's government. And Fatoumata, who is based in Germany and who will be in Celle, is the spokesperson of the Jammeh to Justice campaign. Fatoumata.
Thank you, Reed. Hi, everyone, and thanks for being here, the speakers and also the ones watching. I think basically what I have to say is already being said by many. The accountability process in the Gambia is not really a hidden thing anymore. Like you have explained briefly, it's just good to go over the things. I would say that the accountability process, when the TRC started, we thought everything really is looking good, though we had hopes as Gambians, as people, as victims, also as civil society organizations or victim-led organizations. And we thought, okay, the TRC has been broadcasted and everybody is listening. People had keen interest in the findings of TRC and also the testimonies of victims and as well as perpetrators. And we had hope in the findings of the TRC, which they delivered, like Reed said. The TRC delivered their recommendations to and findings report to the government, which is supposed to deliver a white paper, present a white paper in May this year. That is next month, right? Around the 25th, if I'm not mistaken. They need to, the white paper should be out. But in generally, talking about the accountability process in the Gambia, it is not really looking good for victims and for human rights organizations, let's say victim-led and CSOs in the Gambia. We have seen setbacks and things that try to tell us that this is not going to be an easy ride, even though we knew from the beginning, not that we expected it to go this bad, which is one, the amnesty approval, or it was not an approval, recommendation by the TRC Amnesty Committee to Sana Sabali, the second in command, then to Yahya Jammeh's FPRC, who killed. And he's a self-confessed killer, one would say, because he was there at the TRC and said, I killed those people, and had no remorse for it. And we were baffled that the TRC Amnesty Committee could, issue a statement saying we have given recommended amnesty for this person. One of the things that even made it really heartbreaking is that victims were not included in the amnesty process. We have not still seen the amnesty bill. We, as victim-led organizations, as victims, as CSOs, have not seen the amnesty bill, which makes it really weird, because we need to know what's going on there. We have written to request for this amnesty bill and still have not seen anything. The second one is the release of junglers. Here we are talking about junglers or members of the junglers like Korea, like Bai L right now, and also we have Ousman in Switzerland who are being tried, on the universal jurisdiction. And we had expected that the Gambia sets a pace or a good example in prosecuting these people. But we have seen that the junglers who had come on the TRC and confessed to killing people are being released in the Gambia. This is shocking to victims themselves, and I would say organizations are shocked, but victims who have been direct victims of these junglers are really shocked by how this is playing out on us as Gambians. And because we have seen they have confessed it, and the next thing we see is that they're being released with our Ministry of Justice or the government of the Gambia not taking the cases to court or doing anything to retain them. Next, we have seen the parliament. I think Baba has mentioned that, Reed has mentioned it. We have seen the people who still say they stand by Jammeh coming back, and they feel like this accountability process or the transitional justice process in the Gambia is a witch hunt to hold Jammeh to account, because we hate Jammeh as people who are working in this transitional justice process, or this, trying to bring him to justice. And they are being named as Speaker and Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly. Speaker of the National Assembly means he is the third in command in Gambia. When the president or the vice president is not there anymore, you have that same person being the president of the Republic of the Gambia. That is what we are talking about, and that's how serious it is that we have that person being named as the Speaker of the National Assembly. And before that, what precedes is seeing the government of the Gambia, the party of the president, go into coalition with the Jammeh's party, the party that was there, supported the killing, raping, and extrajudiciary killing of Gambian people that we are fighting to attain. I would like to say, since I'm given 5 minutes, I'm trying to rush everything. I would just like to say there's a good thing out of all of this. Gambian victims are strong. Gambian victims don't say, we are heartbroken, we are going to sleep. No, we say, well, we didn't expect it. It's heartbreaking. We take some time to just reflect, but we come back. And we are strong. Gambian civil society or victim-led organization, we have seen gift victims in Gambia form organizations that are fighting, that are working day in, day out to make sure the recommendations of the TRC are being implemented. We are working with the Ministry of Justice and make sure we flagged the fact that the Gambia government is not including victims, victim-led organizations, civil society organizations in the processes that they are doing. The good thing is that victim-led organizations, civil society organizations are doing their best to participate, contribute in the government white paper, making sure we impact what we would see in the government white paper come 25th of May. We hope that they stick to the date. And I think those are really good things, and we hope that things would work out in the Gambia. We know it is not going to be an easy ride. We knew that from the beginning. Things are turning out really difficult right now, but just to say the accountability process in the Gambia is not looking as good as we might have hoped, at least a little. We didn't hope it was going to be a piece of cake, but right now it's not looking good, and we hope that the Gambia government learns from the international bodies like Germany, like Switzerland, like the US, who are holding their own citizens who had killed citizens of the Gambia, non-citizens, to account, and also do something, hoping that the recommendations of the TRC would be taken seriously and implemented. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fatoumata. Finally, we will hear from the president of the Gambia Bar Association, Celle Tal. Celle is also an activist. He was one of the founders, one of the organizers of Gambia Has Decided, the citizens movement that rose up when 5 years ago when Yahya Jammeh refused to cede power after losing the election. And as head of the Bar Association, as he will certainly tell us, he's been very involved in consultations nationally and internationally on how to deal with the TRC recommendations, how and where prosecutions could be carried out. So, Celle, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Reid, and thank you for all the participants, for taking time, and also to the organizers for this timely webinar. And really, every time I hear testimonies of victims or victims' families, it really breaks my heart. And this is about human beings and people and their loved ones. And for me, like I always say on record, impunity is not an option. And we have many challenges, but Reid and I, back in 2019, decided to start the conversation about how and when and where to try people like Jammeh and his enablers post-TRC. In the process, with other partners, local and international, we organized a series of consultative meetings. The first, back in June 2020, we had one with the victims and also one with experts to look at the different options for prosecution. And I believe November of last year, we also had one we call From Truth to Justice. Now that the TRC has now sifted through a lot of evidence and witnesses and come to its conclusion and recommended very serious adverse findings against Jammeh and the enablers for being responsible for causing some crimes against humanity against Gambians and non-Gambians. How do we now prosecute them? Obviously, naturally, the first option would have been prosecuting them domestically, that is in Gambian courts. But it's very clear and evident that the Gambian courts are not equipped to deal with the kinds of crimes that have been committed against Gambians. These are international crimes like torture, injustice, offenses, and crimes against humanity, which, first of all, are not in our books. We don't have those crimes on the Gambian law. And also, we don't have the necessary safeguards on our laws in terms of victim protection and the like. And there's so many other gaps. Also, there's also issue of the need to get certain laws passed to ensure you can properly prosecute. And so many other legal challenges really make it impossible to charge them on the Gambia. And we've also seen the NIA 11 case, 99 case, and how long it's been dragging. So really, the Gambian court really it's a no-no. Well agreed that it's not the way to go. And the option now is left is either international or a hybrid, which is domestic and international. I think the hybrid court is the most favored option. We have a consensus on going hybrid because the hybrid will allow us to bring in as much Gambian element into it, make it as Gambian as possible so the Gambians can have ownership and can have legitimacy. And also where there are gaps on the Gambian laws and Gambian system, we can now piggyback on international criminal law. And this can be done this way by ensuring that we have a treaty with ECOWAS. Why ECOWAS? Because ECOWAS, 8 different ECOWAS nationalities were killed in the migrant case, as you know, and Gambia is a member of ECOWAS. So the best option would be for Gambia to enter into a treaty with ECOWAS and then have a hybrid court in the Gambia with cloak with international jurisdiction. This would perhaps circumvent some of the challenges that we would have if we're actually going the Gambian route. And also, it would also be easier, for example, if Gambia were to ask for extradition, if we have the backing of ECOWAS. It's one thing Gambia as a country asking for Jammeh to Guinea. It's another thing if an ECOWAS back court is asking for the extradition of Jammeh and maybe others outside the jurisdiction. All this will really make it a little easier than if only Gambia is going up on its own, apart from the other challenges I mentioned. It is very important that to know that all these processes, we have really looked at the importance of making sure that it is victim-centered, victim-centric, because victims are central to the 3-year process. And whatever we do, the victim must have a role. And the only way, one of the only ways that they can have a role is if you have an internationalized court that recognizes and has rules that allow victims' participation, not only to be as mere witnesses, but to participate. So that their stories can be heard, they can have representation, amongst other things, and also have things like victim protection of witnesses and all those things. We just, I think just a couple of days ago, we've seen that the Minister of Justice has been training their staff and prosecutors, their staff, and also members of the police. I think this is one of the recommendations that we gave in our June consultation, that they should start to prepare themselves in earnest, in readiness for the white paper, which has started happening. The judiciary also have been engaged in training. So the local stakeholders have been engaged in at least some preliminary training to get them up to speed. But at the end of the day, it's all very well and good to train our judges, to train our prosecutors, and to train the police. But after all said and done, it all boils down to political will. The Attorney General may have the good intentions to set up all of this to be done on the ground, to set up the courts. But at the end of the day, political will is what will make or break the success of the TJ story. I mean, the TJ process. And if never again, if we really mean never again, not just to be a slogan, but to be reality, if we're going to say no to impunity, we must bring those responsible for the greatest crimes to book. We must hold them accountable. It is not just enough to have reparations. It's not enough just to have reparations and say, it's okay. We must, those who are really responsible must be held accountable, so that in the future, it will deter others from committing the same crimes. To make sure that in Gambia, we cannot tolerate people treating anyone in this manner. That is, impunity will not be tolerated again. And the only way we can make sure that impunity is not tolerated again is by having prosecution. It's not by having reparation or reconciliation. And you can have reconciliation, of course, but you can have, in my opinion, you cannot have real reconciliation without justice, without bringing those responsible to book, starting from the top, that's Yahya Jammeh. So we hope that we have been working very closely with government and the bar, Reed, Case and others, and partners, to provide them with support. And we hope that in the near future, I think around May 25th, the white paper will come out. We hope that they will actually prosecute. In fact, the Attorney General did say that certainly that there will be prosecutions. And I think we've already started discussion as to how this prosecution should be done. It is possible, only possible if there's political will. On that note, I really thank all the participants, and we just keep on the fight. It's a long road, it's a marathon. We have to manage expectations, but we have to have the courage and continue on this fight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sal. Those are all the speakers on the program. We have time for question and answers. We also have with us Whitney Martina Nosakari from Human Rights Watch, who is also going to be in Celle. I should say that several people who you see on the screen, for if there are any journalists or others who have had the opportunity to be in Celle, Fatoumata will be there, Nana Jo Endow from the NGO Anaked will be there, I will be there, Whitney will be there, and we will also have opportunity to speak to people there on Monday. Please contact us for details. If anyone has questions, they should use the question and answer function. Is that, if not, maybe I can ask a question.
Can I just
please, Baba, please
say something?
Please.
I want to thank everybody that was involved in the findings, because it wasn't easy. It was a lot of investigations that you yourself with Marion Volkman started a couple of years ago, and I was there. I know what you guys, what she went through, Marion herself, late night meetings just to make sure that, you know, certain things, sources and everything. She really did an amazing job. So I really want to thank her, and also thank Patrick Croker, the lawyer, who also accepted to take the case, knowing that it's not a German case, it's a Gambian case where things will be very different. And he had to travel all the way to the Gambia to really do a lot of research to make sure that the case, we have a strong case. And yourself, last not least, now I can call you like, you know, somebody that I really know, you know, like an uncle, not a dad figure. But you've been really there, you know, for the victims of Gambia, of the Yahya Jammeh, since the start, you know, and still, you know, we're doing this together, and hope we will come to the end of this one day, bringing Jammeh to justice, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Baba. I was going to, other question, I see a question. So yes, I'm putting in the chat function, I just sent out the names of someone asked for the names, and I just sent out the program.
Raise their hands?
Somebody has raised their hands. The name of the town where the trial will be conducted is in Celle, C-E-L-L-E, which is outside of a short distance outside of Hanover. The trial begins on Monday. It will continue Tuesday, and then, as we understand it, the trial will go for basically 2 days a week through the beginning of at least through the beginning of next year. So you know, for those of, I mean, we're not expecting a verdict for a long time. I don't know, Arne, if you want to answer anything more about the details. As Baba mentioned, we would have hoped to have his lawyer, Patrick Croker, who also is with ECCHR, and Patrick Croker is the lawyer for Baba. He was in the Gambia recently, preparing and conducting research, and he will be there also in Celle on Monday. Arne, do you want to add anything about the trial and you know, the technicalities of what to expect?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I don't have access to the files as my colleague has, because he is appointed as a lawyer, and I'm just working for ECCHR. But what I can say, that the length of the trial will, of course, depend on the conduct of the defendant as well as of his lawyers. And in many cases, German criminal trials tend to take a lot of time because of the principle of orality, which means that all documents relevant to the trial will have to be read out loud. Like, this is the default, and there are some ways around it. But this, for instance, could influence the length of the trial. But beyond that, I can't give any more specific answers to your question.
A question, this is, I guess, for Whitney and for Arna, whoever wants to take it. I mean, what could be done? What do we want to see happen to make this trials like this more accessible? You know, when I've been involved in trials, I mean, most international trials are televised. I mean, the Hissan Habre trial, trials at the ICC, they're actually on TV. And I mean, if you want, you can watch them. What could be done to make a trial like this more accessible to people in Gambia?
Anna,
Whitney,
I can go ahead. Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, Anna touched upon a lot of important points earlier, right? So the German authorities are having this trial or conducting these trials on behalf of the international community, which means that people that are not only, you know, affected by the crimes charged, but also others that are interested need to see and understand the developments of this trial. And Human Rights Watch has in the past, you know, observing these universal jurisdiction trials, published a lot of recommendations for both the prosecution, police investigators, and the courts. Starting with, you know, the court, what is helpful is always, you know, making sure that press releases are published not only in the German language but also in English and maybe in the, of course, in the language that is spoken by the affected community. Arne touched upon this case in Koblenz against a former Syrian intelligence officer where we did not have any press releases in Arabic. The court actually decided at the very end to publish a press release about the verdict in Arabic, and this is a good step, but it's not enough, right? What we also, you know, what we'd like to see is more outreach by the authorities, by police investigators, by prosecutorial authorities, communicating with the affected communities and making sure that they know what is happening in the trial. And then lastly, one major point, which was also made, right, is that not only access is granted to journalists who are maybe non-German speakers, but that access is also granted to visitors in the public gallery who might not be formal parties to the trial and thereby have access to translation. So what we want to see is like German authorities opening up and making sure that justice is not only done, but that people can see that justice is done. Arne, please feel free to add if I missed something.
I think you pretty much covered everything. I can subscribe to that. Maybe as an addition, I think like I have the feeling that German courts and the judicial system in general is not yet prepared for proceedings according to the principle of universal jurisdiction. I think in general, German courts are very reluctant when it comes to public outreach, which might in some cases also be reasonable when it comes to the rights of the defendant. Of course, it can also be an intrusion into private sphere when it comes to, for instance, like broadcasting outside the courtroom or inside the courtroom. But still, as you rightly pointed out, I think especially when it comes to universal jurisdiction trials, we need to take into account the fact that German courts are holding trial on behalf of the international community, and thus the international community should be involved.
Thank you. I don't see any questions. Okay, Al-Haji Mane, we're calling, you have raised your hand, so, and Aji Fanta as well, yes.
Can you hear me, guys?
Yes.
Great. I'm Al-Haji Mane. I work with this newspaper. During the course of the discussion, several interruptions happened, so we couldn't get full grip of all these speakers. So if we could, and I understand that the event is being recorded. I'm not sure.
Yes, the meeting has been recorded. Yes.
Okay. So is it possible for us to get perhaps a copy of this in accordance.
Yes, if anybody sends us their email, we can give you a copy of the recording if that's okay. So this is Ajifanta Marine, whose father, Daba Marine, who was the head of the Secret Services, is one of the alleged victims of one of the operations that Bai L was allegedly involved in. Go ahead, Ajifanta.
Thank you, Mr. Brody, and greetings everyone on here. Thank you all so much for organizing this panel and speaking so well and eloquently on the needs for justice and accountability. So as Mr. Brody mentioned, my name is Ajifanta Marina, and my dad was one of the people also, I guess, murdered by the junglers, and Bai Lo was confessed as being involved in those killings. My question is for the April 6 people where my dad and 5 others were killed. I understand they're not part of the indictment. I wanted to ask whether there's other ways to hold him accountable in that specific case.
Thank you. So there are, as I mentioned, there are several cases to which, so Bai L has been living in Germany for several years. And in 2013, he gave 2 interviews, 2 very long interviews on the radio, in which he confessed, essentially, to the murder of Ajifanta's father and five of his associates, or he confessed to being involved as a driver. Also, the murder of, we saw it in the video, we saw a woman, Yahya Jammeh, whose father was killed, Haruna Jammeh. Bai L was also a driver in that incident. We also saw in the video the case of the 59 migrants, most of them from Ghana, who were killed. And Bai L also described that in his interviews. As I understand it, and Arne, you can perhaps correct me, the investigations as to these other cases are ongoing in Germany. We don't really understand why some of the cases were included in the indictment. The 3 cases that we've been talking about, lawyer Sillah, Deyda Hydara, and Nyasi, were included, and these other cases were not included. But as we understand that there are continuing investigations in these other cases, but Arne, you may have more information, or maybe not.
Well, as already mentioned, I don't have access to the prosecutor's files, so I can't, I really don't know why he didn't also indict Bai L for these cases. The German prosecutor is only allowed to bring charges if there is sufficient suspicion of a crime. But I don't know like what findings can be found inside of his investigation files. So actually I can't give an answer to this question.
Okay. Okay, Louise, will you put Abu Saidi on? Okay, you're on apparently. Abu Bakr? No. You need to unmute your mic.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Now?
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
All the panelists.
I'm sorry that we can hardly hear you. There's a lot of feedback and the connection is very bad.
My
I'm sorry the connection was bad. We have a question from Elsa from in the chat from the European Union delegation, and she asks how a focused trial like this will open the scope to look at Jammeh's regime in the wider sense. I mean, as I understand it, it's the possibility here is just developing more evidence. I'm not sure that this trial itself, we have proposed, and I think the court plans to bring witnesses, context witnesses, people who can describe the wider pattern of crimes to this trial. So the trial, as Arne said, a lot of the trial will be presumably documents being read in, including Bai L's interviews, including the reports of the Truth Commission, and things like that. There will also be context witnesses, we believe, although we haven't gotten the witness schedule, people who are associated with the TRRC, people who have done research into the crimes. But in a strict sense, this trial will not prove, this trial is only looking at proving Bai L's alleged responsibility. I think the hope is also, and other people can chime in here, that you have a trial in Germany, you have a trial in the United States. The trial in Switzerland is probably the biggest one, as Babaka said. That's a trial not of a small person. I mean, of a smaller, but that's a trial of the former Minister of Interior, Ousman Sonko, and that will be closer to a regime trial. But the hope is also that these will kind of raise the bar and make it more different and create. I mean, Sal was talking about the political will. This is all about political will, there isn't. I mean, we've seen this in Chile and in other places when with Pinochet, and when trials start to happen outside, there becomes a greater push for trials inside. I don't know if anybody else wants to take that question, and then I think this will be the last one or two questions.
I mean, maybe just to add on that. So since Bai L is charged with a crime against humanity, the court will have to establish whether there has been a systematic or widespread attack against the Gambian civil society in the context of which the individual acts of which Bai L is accused took place. So this means that the court, as you rightly pointed out, Reid, will have to look at the context in which the alleged crimes have been committed. And this means the court will also have to look at the political dimension of the acts that have been committed. And in that sense, the court will have to look beyond the individual responsibility of the accused. But as you rightly said, of course, the judgment, the verdict that might be issued is in no way binding in terms of legal responsibility of Jammeh himself.
Arne, while you're on, Abdullah John from the Associated Press asks, is there any possibility for Bai L to strike a plea deal with German prosecutors and be used as a potential witness against Jammeh's hit squad?
I think that's a difficult question to answer. I can't give a direct answer to this. I mean, the German Code of Criminal Procedure allows for plea deals in a specific sense, but I don't think that this is going to be relevant in this case. So, but I would need to look into this in like with more time, so I could give an answer to this.
Okay, I think, okay.
Reed, we can't hear you.
Just do it. Okay. Okay. I think we will stop here. People can. I'm sure people have access. Louise, why don't you put your email into the chat, and anybody who wants to direct a question to any of us, if you could send it to Louise, who is who has organized all of this, please do, and we'll make sure that the right person gets it. Again, there is a question and answer that that we have sent around that you can also find on the Human Rights Watch and Trial websites. Several of us will be in Celle on Monday. We're also, there will be a photo op at 8:15 in the morning with the victims and the NGOs for if there's any press photographers who want to be there. And please thank everybody very much for this, and let's hope that this trial is the first of many trials. Let's hope that the political will in the Gambia will exist, and that as Fatoumata said, the victims, and I have to say, as somebody who's been working on this, I think it's incredible how, I mean, we have several people here who's on this call whose fathers were killed, and who have become activists, and whose stories are known, and who have a seat at the table. Everybody in the Gambia knows Fatoumata. They know Baba. They know the stories of the victims. And in the Gambia, we saw that 73% of Gambians want to see justice happen. The Truth Commission's report, as Fatoumata was saying on the video, people were glued to their TV sets and their radios. This was something that affected people profoundly. There is a deep reservoir of support for the idea of justice. Hopefully, this trial will be one little piece in that edifice of justice that Baba and Fatoumata and Amie and Gambian and Salutal and Aji Fanta and Gambian activists and international activists are working for. So thank everybody for participating. Thank me to Louise for putting this all together. It's always good to have teenagers around to be able to do these things for us. We will see you in Celle, and we will see you next time. Thank you.